By day 5 of fish-sitting duty, I had a body to hide and a cover-up to plan. My son Will stood at the front door with his camp duffel bag and pointed at me with the most serious expression a 10-year-old can make. He said, "Captain Finn is counting on you, Dad, and 2 weeks is a long time, and if anything happens to him, I will never emotionally recover." I promised him that Captain Finn would be alive and thriving when he got home. The first 2 days, I was a model fish parent, and I fed him every morning while drinking my coffee. Day 3, I had a big presentation at work and forgot. Day 4, I forgot again. Day 5, I walked past the tank and saw Captain Finn floating at the top of the water like a tiny orange surrender flag, and my whole body went cold. My wife would be home in less than an hour, so I scooped the body out with a coffee mug and flushed it, then grabbed my keys and drove to the pet store like I was fleeing a crime scene. I found the goldfish section and realized I had no idea what kind of fish Captain Finn was. I bought the one that looked closest and raced home and dropped it in the tank just as my wife's car pulled into the driveway. She walked in and stopped at the tank and said, "Did you clean the tank or something?" And my heart almost stopped. I said, "Yeah, I thought it looked cloudy," and she shrugged and walked away, and I stood there trying not to pass out. The next morning, the new fish was floating at the top, dead as a doornail. I flushed the body and drove back to the pet store where the same teenage employee from yesterday watched me walk in with visible confusion. He said, "Didn't you just buy a fish yesterday?" And I said, "That was a gift from my niece." And he said, "Did your niece have a funeral for it already?" And I bought another fish and left. Fish number 2 lasted 3 days before I found it belly up on day 8. I drove back to the pet store, and the same teenager saw me coming and actually took his headphones off like he was settling in for entertainment. He said, "How many nieces do you have, man?" And I said, "Several." And he said, "Are these fish being released into the wild or something?" He squinted at me and said, "Dude, I'm starting to think I should call someone." And I grabbed a fish and practically ran to the register. I bought fish number 3 along with a water testing kit and stress coat and treated that tank like an intensive care unit. Will FaceTimed me on day 10 and said, "Dad, can I see Captain Finn?" And I had to angle the phone so carefully I was doing yoga. He squinted at the screen and said, "Why does he look different?" And I said, "The lighting is weird." And he said, "He looks fatter." I said, "I've been feeding him really well." And he seemed satisfied, but I was sweating through my shirt. On day 12, my wife was looking for a pen in my work bag and pulled out 3 crumpled pet store receipts. She held them up and said, "Why do you have receipts for goldfish and fish medicine?" And I said, "I'm planning a surprise for Will, please don't ruin it." She gave me a suspicious look but put them back and I almost collapsed. Day 13, I woke up at 3 in the morning and walked downstairs in my underwear to make sure fish number 3 was still alive, and I watched him swim in circles for 10 minutes before going back to bed. I barely slept the night before pickup day because I kept having nightmares about Will crying and me being the worst father in history. I picked Will up from camp and he talked the whole drive home about his friends and the counselor who could burp the alphabet. But the second we walked through the door, he dropped his bag and ran to the tank. He stared at the fish and I could feel my heart pounding. He didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity, and I couldn't take it anymore, so I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Will, I am so sorry. I have completely failed you as a father." My voice cracked and Will turned around and looked up at me with about 6 different expressions crossing his face. He said, "Dad, why do you look like you're about to cry?" And I said, "Because I know how much Captain Finn means to you." Will's eyes went wide and he said, "Dad, stop, please stop. I have to tell you something." Will took a deep breath and said, "Captain Finn was already dead when I left for camp." I just stood there blinking at him like he was speaking a foreign language. He said, "I forgot to feed him the week before camp and found him floating 2 days before I left, and I didn't know what to do, so I left him in the tank because I was scared you would be disappointed in me." His voice got smaller and he said, "I spent 2 weeks at camp dreading coming home because I thought I was going to be in huge trouble. I felt all the tension drain out of my body, and I pulled him into a hug and told him that fish die sometimes and he wasn't in trouble." He squeezed me back and then pulled away and looked at the tank and said, "Wait, so whose fish is that?" I started laughing and he said, "Dad, how many fish did you go through?" I started laughing so hard I had to sit down. We named the new fish Mr. Guilty, and we didn't say a word to his mother about any of this, at least not until the plumbing got clogged up with fish bodies and she demanded an explanation.
My mother stole my inheritance to gamble, so I called the police. My grandma died in February. She and my mother hadn't spoken in 11 years. The falling out happened when I was 17, and I never got the full story from either side. Just fragments, just the shape of something that had clearly hurt both of them in ways they'd never recovered from. What I do know is that my grandma never stopped asking about me. My aunt told me she kept a box of newspaper cuttings, school things I'd been in, a photo from my graduation she'd gotten from somewhere, things a woman kept when she'd been cut off from someone she loved and had no way to reach him. She left me 42,000 pounds. Not my mother, me. Specifically and deliberately me. Named in the will with a note attached that my solicitor read me over the phone that said simply, "I hope this helps you build something good." I'd cried in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive home. My mother had been my grandma's next of kin on paper despite the estrangement and administrative oversight nobody had corrected. She'd been contacted by the estate solicitor as part of the process and had somehow, in the 3 weeks between my grandma's death and the will being fully read, accessed an account she shouldn't have been able to access and moved 31,000 pounds. I found out when the solicitor called me to discuss the estate and mentioned a discrepancy. I didn't understand what she was describing at first. Then I did. My mother's gambling had been something the family had been managing quietly for 6 years. Not managing well. Managing in the way families managed addiction when they loved someone and didn't know what else to do. Covering debts, not talking about it at family occasions. Finding reasons for things that didn't need reasons. I'd lent her money twice and told myself it was for bills. I knew it wasn't for bills. I'd chosen not to know. I drove to her house. She was home and she knew why I was there before I said anything, because the look on her face when she opened the door was the look of someone who'd been waiting for a knock. I told her I knew about the money. She said she was going to pay it back. I asked her when. She said when she got herself sorted. I asked her how much of it was left. She looked at the floor. None of it was left. 31,000 pounds of money my grandma had saved and set aside specifically for me was gone. Money from a woman my mother had cut off 11 years ago and never reconciled with. Money from a woman who'd kept a box of newspaper cuttings about a grandson she wasn't allowed to see. I called the police from her hallway while she was standing there watching me. She said my name twice. I kept the phone to my ear. I told the officer I needed to report a theft from a deceased person's estate and gave them the details and my solicitor's contact information. My mother sat down on the bottom stair while I was talking and put her face in her hands. 2 officers came that afternoon. My mother gave a statement. She didn't deny it. She'd been through enough with the gambling to understand that denial had a limited lifespan, and she was past trying. One of the officers asked me privately if I understood the implications for my mother. father. I told him I understood completely. She was charged. She's waiting for a court date. My aunt called me the next day and said she was heartbroken, and that she understood why I'd done it, and that both things could be true at once, and she loved me. I told her I knew. The estate recovered 11,000 of the 31. The rest is gone. I have 11,000 pounds of what my grandma left me, and a note saved on my phone that says, "I hope this helps you build something good." I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like now, but I think about her keeping that box of newspaper cuttings, and I know she'd understand why I made the call. Subscribe for more stories.
I became furious after my sister kicked my dog and threw her out. My dog Nell is a 4-year-old whippet. She is gentle and quiet and entirely harmless, and she has never in her life done a single thing to deserve what happened to her on Saturday afternoon in my own living room. My sister Amy does not like dogs. I have always known that, and I have always accommodated it without complaint or comment. Every single time Nell drifts toward her, Amy makes a small noise and shifts away, and I have always called Nell back immediately and moved on without making anything of it. For 2 years I have managed this quietly and without a single conversation about it because I genuinely did not think it needed one. Amy does not like dogs, and Nell is my dog, and the solution has always been that I manage the situation myself, and I have never minded doing that. Nell wandered over to Amy on Saturday afternoon while Amy was sitting on the sofa scrolling through her phone. Nell does this with everyone who sits down. She appears near you and she waits patiently, and she puts her nose very gently on your knee if you have not stopped her first. Not jumping, not pawing, not making a sound of any kind, just resting her long, thin nose on your knee and looking up at you with her eyes very wide, waiting to see. It is quite genuinely the least threatening thing in the world, and Nell has been doing it since she was a puppy. I was on the other side of the room and I could see it happening, and I was already moving across to call her back. Amy kicked her before I got there. Not a tap, not a nudge to shift her away. She drew her foot back and she kicked my dog hard enough that Nell yelped a sharp sound I had never heard from her before and scrambled across the floor and pressed herself behind the armchair against the wall and did not come back out. I was across the room in 2 steps. I stood over Amy and asked her what she had just done. She said Nell had been in her face and she had not asked for that. I told her Nell had put her nose on her knee and she had kicked her, and I needed to know what she thought that was. Amy said she did not like dogs getting on her. I told her I had always removed Nell the moment she was near her, and that this time Nell had put her nose on her leg and had not even been given a single second to be called back before Amy had kicked her like she was some inconvenience to be cleared out of the way. Amy said I was overreacting about a dog. I told her to get her things and leave. She said I was being ridiculous. I told her the only person who got to decide what was ridiculous inside my house was me, and Nell was part of my home, and Amy had kicked her, and she needed to go right now. Amy picked up her bag and said I would calm down and see it differently eventually. I told her I would not, and she was not welcome back until she had genuinely understood what she had done. I did not expect that to happen anytime soon. She left. I went behind the armchair and sat down on the floor with Nell. She was not hurt. She was frightened. She was pressed flat against the skirting board with her ears completely back, and it took a few minutes of sitting quietly before she came to me. Then she crawled into my lap and stayed there, and I stroked her ears and told her she was a good girl and she had done absolutely nothing wrong because she had not done a single thing wrong in her entire gentle life. Amy sent me a message that evening saying I had chosen a dog over my own sister. I replied and told her that she had chosen to kick an animal who had done absolutely nothing to her. I had chosen to respond to that, and those were 2 entirely different choices. Nell is fine. She is asleep on the sofa right now with her long legs in the air. Amy is not invited back until she is ready to act like someone who deserves to be in the same room as her. Subscribe for more stories.